Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Week 7 Sports Economics Reflection discussion. For this week in class, we talked a bit about this idea of grit and how student athletes are oftentimes put in a precarious position due to certain rules that the NCAA has in conjunction with their other academic responsibilities. But we also talked about this idea of franchise value, antitrust law, and different ways in which professional sports leagues kind of cartelize, which that's of course been a recurring theme throughout the course of these discussions, and how they try to take steps to not step on each other's toes. Like for example, if the NBA wants to schedule a game, they try to do it in such a way to where it doesn't conflict with the National Football League, because naturally they want the least amount of tension possible. Now, one thing I did wish we talked more about was how this sort of worked in Major League Baseball, or MLB for short, because from my understanding, first of all, the season in MLB is significantly longer than in, say, the National Football League, right? Like the NFL right now only has 16 games. Perhaps in this year or in 2022, they're going to expand it to a 17-game season. But regardless, that is far short of the 162-game season that the Major League Baseball has. Now, given that MLB has so many games, there's going to reach a point in the season, typically about maybe June or July, wherever you can tell clearly what teams are going to succeed and make it well into the playoffs versus what teams are going to have 100 or more potentially losses. And so you have a kind of stretch in the kind of going from the second half of the season onwards, where an organization is playing, but they're not playing for much relative to other teams, because even if they win a lot more of their games, they can't make up, for example, their losing ways for the first half of the season. And so you would think this makes a competitive disadvantage for Major League Baseball, especially if you're not particularly interested in the sport. You might go, to something else to watch, or other forms of entertainment, even if it's not a sports league. And this might certainly be the case, but I don't have a lot of data regarding around how that works, like for the MLB. But I did want to bring up that point, that the longer season does bring a lot of a big criticism would be boredom and just dissatisfaction with the competitive parity in Major League Baseball, and that's like the primary complaint for having such a long season, and one of the things that was experimented with, not on purpose, but the coronavirus shortened this most recent MLB season in 2020. So we got to see a little bit about how a season would work under, I think only 50 or 60 games might have been played. Another thing I wanted to discuss with regards to Major League Baseball, or something I wish we would have discussed more rather, is how free agency worked in the MLB and the sort of economics of that. Because I did want to bring up, so I'm personally an NFL fan, or football fan, and so I know a little bit about the history of free agency within the league. Now, I believe it was 1993, Reggie White, who signed with the Green Bay Packers, was really the first major free agency signing in what would, become a subsequent trend in the National Football League, to have these free agency frenzies, as they call it. But the point being is that at the time, for the longest time, the NFL didn't have free agency at all, and it was much more difficult for players to move around the league. But afterwards, whenever they got free agency in a new collective bargaining agreement there in the early 90s, the trade-off was that for the players to get free agency, they had to give up salary cap, or basically the NFL was going to be salary capped now, and it was going to be much more difficult for organizations to just buy all the best players. And the way they determined the salary cap was, I think, relative to the league's overall revenues and the amount of players had to, be paid a certain amount of money that the organization or the franchise made. And as a tangential note, for this upcoming 2021 season, I think this is going to be the first time in nearly a decade where the salary cap has actually gone down due to economic restraints from the COVID-19 pandemic. But in any event, I don't know how free agency really works in Major League Baseball. And I was wondering the extent to which a player is tied down to their contracts, maybe from a team they originally signed with. Because the way it worked in the National Football League, historically, prior to the 1990s, it was that a player, when they signed with an organization and their contract ran out, even after their term had expired, they were very limited with regards to the ability to negotiate or talk with other organizations. And even then, the same franchise who a player played for the prior year, if they weren't picked up, but their original franchise were still interested in acquiring the player, they could do that, but pick up the player for, I think it was 10% less salary, right? So this is something that's not very player friendly at all. And of course, this is why the players, fought for this for a long time, and there were multiple strikes in the National Football League. I think maybe in 1987. The certain years, I guess, don't matter so much for the purposes of what I'm saying, just to know that there were strikes and different conflicts between the Players Union and the National Football League in order to ensure that the players had freedom of movement and freedom of negotiation between the different franchises. And so yeah, I wanted to know how that worked, like more knowledge about that for the MLB, but then I also wanted to look at how this ties into more, I guess, broader conversations about antitrust and this idea, again, a recurring theme about how professional sports leagues cartelize or make it such that they want to have a certain level of parity among the different teams that play within a given league, and B, they want to make it such that other leagues or leagues that are rising or startups cannot potentially compete against the likes of the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, National Hockey League, so on and so forth. So I thought that was something very, very interesting that could have been discussed a little bit more about. And, it was mentioned. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. It was mentioned in the class that even in this current NFL free agency season, there have been a lot of moves of pretty good players, but not enough. Their skill set isn't enough to warrant the amount of money that they would have been making relative to the overall revenues or the payout that the organization has to give out to their entire 53-man roster in the NFL. So like the example that Professor Rizzo brought up was Damien Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs, who was recently cut, as well as Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, who are two of the Kansas City Chiefs starting tackles. They were also cut because due to a combination of different factors. Basically, their play was not going to be worth it relative to how much the Chiefs were going to be paying for their contracts for the upcoming season, in conjunction with the amount of money that they have. Right, so again, it's important for franchises to be able, especially when you're in a salary capped league, to be able to balance the needs of players who might be superstar players and bring a lot of talent, hard work, dedication to your team, but also to build a good team around solid players who might be willing to take pay cuts to a certain level in order to ensure that the team could make a championship run. But anyway, we talked about a whole heck of a lot over these last two class periods, and I'm glad I could discuss just a little bit here. I'm running out of time for today, but thank you for listening, and I will see you all again next week.